Tyler Reeves had never been the neighborly type, but it wasn't because he disliked people. In fact, in a different world, under less invasive circumstances, he might have gotten along just fine with the barbecue dads and lawn-obsessed retirees who dotted the quiet, sun-baked neighborhood of Bridgemont Springs. He had chosen this community not for its charm or amenities, but for its boundaries. Specifically, the ones outlined in his property deed, which made clear that his house, his land, and everything within it fell outside of the neighborhood council's jurisdiction. It was a technicality most didn't even know existed. When the original developer filed paperwork for the subdivision decades ago, Tyler's parcel was mistakenly excluded from the neighborhood agreement, making it a standalone lot surrounded by association homes. To Tyler, it was the best of both worlds: peace and privacy, with no committees, dues, or obligations to host potlucks or allow strangers to weigh in on the shade of his mailbox. For a man who valued order, autonomy, and peace above all else, it was ideal. The house itself wasn't ostentatious. 2 stories, weather-resistant stucco, solar panel roofing, and a detached garage he had converted into a modest greenhouse and storage space for tools and supplies. A stone pathway ran from the front porch to the gravel-lined driveway, and the yard, while not manicured to HOA standards, was neat and organized in a way only an efficiency-minded person could achieve. Motion sensor lights framed the exterior, not because he feared danger, but because he hated surprises. A smart home system powered the locks, the camera feed, and the temperature regulation. Inside, his world was quiet, deliberate, and entirely his own. Tyler worked from home as a logistics systems consultant for a supply chain optimization firm. Most of his day was spent on video calls with corporate clients, dissecting inefficient distribution patterns and re-engineering workflows. It was thankless, meticulous work, but it paid extremely well and required no office presence. That alone allowed him to structure his days exactly as he wanted. Early morning runs, quiet lunches on the back patio, weekends spent reading thick technical manuals for pleasure, and the satisfaction of finishing each day knowing the world beyond. His walls was held at bay by well-maintained fences and statutes on private property law. The first time he noticed something was off, it was subtle. A thick, glossy flyer wedged between his mailbox and the hinge. More than just a neighborhood update. It was branded with the overly cheerful color scheme of the Bridgemont Beautification Task Force, which sounded benign enough except for the wording, "Your property has been selected for potential visual enhancement support." Tyler smirked as he tossed it into the bin. He had no desire to be enhanced, and certainly not under the scrutiny of strangers who wore khaki vests with clipboards. But this was only the beginning. A few days later, he came home from a grocery run and noticed his garbage bin had been pulled closer to the street than he'd left it. Precisely aligned next to the curb as if someone were modeling ideal waste placement etiquette. It felt harmless but annoying, like a dog marking territory. Then came the chalk mark on his driveway. Faint, pink, and shaped like a triangle. Tyler reviewed the camera footage and saw a group of 4 people, all middle-aged, none familiar, walking up the path as if it were open terrain, pointing at his hedges, murmuring among themselves. One woman, stout, wide-hipped, with short blonde hair and the kind of sunglasses that looked permanently fused to her face, knelt down and made the mark before they casually left through the side gate. No knock, no explanation. Later that night, Tyler sat in his living room watching the footage on repeat. He didn't like the tone of it, the entitlement, the silent assumption of access. It wasn't the presence that bothered him, it was the ease. They walked through his space as if it belonged to them, confident that their matching t-shirts and laminated badges granted them dominion over what they had no right to touch. That woman in particular, he'd come to learn her name soon enough, carried herself with the righteousness of someone who believed she could not be wrong. There was a particular swagger in how she gestured to the others, as if conducting a tour through her own backyard. Over the following week, Tyler's home became a quiet target. A letter arrived taped to his door, marked with urgent visual violation, non-conforming landscape perimeter. It wasn't from any city code enforcement office. The letterhead bore a stamp from the Neighborhood Renewal Committee, a title Tyler had never heard before and certainly never agreed to be bound by. They referenced ordinances that didn't apply to his property, citing things like hedge height, frontage harmony, and mailbox cohesiveness. Tyler laughed at the absurdity at first. He was technically exempt. Legally, they had no control over his house or how he maintained it. But legal technicalities don't stop people like Karen. The next encounter came uninvited and in broad daylight. Tyler was on a call with a client when a soft chime indicated the front camera had detected motion. At first, he ignored it, but then a second alert came, and a third. When he finally pulled up the feed, what he saw made his stomach turn. 5 people, 3 men and 2 women, all wearing reflective vests with clipboards in hand, were standing in his front yard measuring the width of his walkway with a tape measure. One of them was writing something on a legal pad. They didn't knock. They didn't ask. They moved with the assuredness of people who believed they had institutional permission. Tyler ended his call early, walked to the front door, and opened it silently. He stood in the frame, arms crossed, watching them like a wolf at the edge of the den. The group paused, caught mid-gesture, and turned toward him. The woman he recognized, the short, wide woman with the permanent sunglasses, stepped forward with a practiced smile. "Good afternoon," she said cheerfully. "Karen Mallett, Neighborhood Clean and Safe Committee. We're doing a perimeter audit for alignment compliance." Tyler didn't blink. "You're trespassing." Karen's smile didn't fade. "Not officially, according to community initiative guidelines." "I don't fall under your guidelines," he interrupted flatly. Her smile wavered. "Well, there have been complaints. And while technically you might be exempt, the community has a standard, and your property is causing a ripple effect. We're hoping to encourage alignment." "I don't care about your ripples. This is private property, and if I see anyone here again without my consent, I will press charges." Karen's tone turned brittle. "There's no need to be hostile. We're just trying to help." Tyler took a step forward. "You're not." She studied him for a moment, then tilted her head slightly and turned back to her team. "Let's go," she said curtly. As they left, one of the men muttered something about non-participating outliers. Tyler watched them disappear down the sidewalk. He didn't slam the door when he went back inside. He didn't need to. The message had been delivered, and not just by him. Something deeper had shifted that day. He could feel it. Karen had pegged him as a threat to her petty empire of neighborhood order. And now that she had drawn the line, she would keep pushing until one of them crossed it. He didn't know it then, but the moment Karen stepped onto his lawn, clipboard in hand, was the last time things were merely annoying. What was coming next wasn't community politics or passive-aggressive notes or misaligned mailboxes. It was war. Sanitized, polite, and cloaked in phrases like neighborhood standards and community harmony. But war nonetheless. And when war came, it wouldn't be fought with words. It would come with boots on gravel, tools in hand, and the false smile of a woman named Karen, who thought she could take what wasn't hers, just because no one ever stopped her. But Tyler Reeves wasn't just anyone, and this wasn't going to end the way she thought. 3 days after the unwelcome audit of his front yard, Tyler Reeves began to notice patterns. At first, it was easy to dismiss. He was a rational man, someone who relied on logic and data, not paranoia or gut feelings. But rationality has its limits when every time you walk past your window, you see the same silver SUV parked exactly 47 feet away from your mailbox. With the same driver, engine idling, pretending to check her phone for 15 minutes. Straight. He started timing them, logging each appearance. And after the 4th instance in a week, he knew this wasn't coincidence. Something was brewing, and it wasn't grassroots gardening. Karen's visit had been more than just an act of overreach. It was a declaration. Tyler understood the type. People like her didn't retreat when met with resistance. They regrouped, they reframed, and they returned. They found new language, new angles, new allies. And sure enough, on a gray Thursday morning, a certified envelope arrived with a formal seal embossed on the front. Residential Improvement Notice. Mandatory Compliance Review. It was 5 pages long, filled with legalese that tried to pass itself off as friendly guidance. According to the document, Tyler's home had been flagged for procedural nonconformity relating to external modifications that may impact adjacent properties, which, in plain English, meant his greenhouse windows were the wrong tint, and his driveway. Stones didn't match the palette deemed acceptable for community cohesion. What followed was a breakdown of potential corrective actions: power washing, repainting, removal of unauthorized plantings, and a warning that failure to comply might result in escalated review, Tyler knew none of this applied to him. He wasn't part of their little fiefdom, and no amount of bureaucratic formatting would change the fact that his deed was ironclad. But the notice wasn't about legal right. It was a psychological weapon. It wasn't meant to win in court. It was meant to wear him down. The very presence of the letter, the subtle implication of surveillance and collective pressure, was designed to isolate him, to make him question whether it was worth the hassle to push back. And that was when he decided to escalate, on his terms. He contacted a property attorney, not a pitbull type, but a methodical one who specialized in neighborhood boundary disputes. Her name was Linda Crane, a seasoned legal tactician who had seen this sort of thing unfold across suburban America. When Tyler laid out the documents, the videos, and the interactions, she didn't blink. "You're not crazy," she said, leafing through the compliance notice. "This is targeted harassment, masked as civic duty. You'd be shocked how often this happens. People like Karen have weaponized the language of community improvement to push out nonconformists. It's usually subtle, but your case isn't. This is aggressive." She advised him not to respond directly to any further communications. All replies would now go through her office. Tyler set up a call forwarding system and gave her access to every incoming letter, email, or note. She sent a formal cease and desist letter to the neighborhood council, citing unlawful harassment, property line violations, and unauthorized trespassing. The letter was crisp, pointed, and copied to the city's zoning office. For a few days, the pressure seemed to subside. But quiet wasn't peace. It was strategy. The next move came not from Karen directly, but from the infrastructure she controlled. Tyler came home one afternoon to find his water pressure almost non-existent. A note hung loosely from the knob of his outdoor spigot, handwritten, laminated, and attached with zip ties. Scheduled service interruption. Water system audit. It bore no official seal, no contact number, and no date. When Tyler checked with the city utilities department, they had no record of any service work on his street. Someone had tampered with the supply valve on the public access point just outside his fence, disguising interference as maintenance. He reported the tampering. The city sent a technician, who restored service and confirmed that the disruption had been manual, not due to a fault or scheduled work. But the technician, a young man with sharp eyes and a weary voice, warned Tyler quietly before leaving. "They're using work vests now," he said. "You'd be surprised how easy it is to look official if you dress the part and carry a clipboard." The line had been crossed. Tyler realized this wasn't just about control. It was about provocation. They weren't trying to correct him. They were trying to draw him into a reaction that could be spun into justification. But Tyler wasn't going to give them that satisfaction. Instead, he reinforced. He installed additional motion-activated floodlights along the eastern fence where most of the foot traffic seemed to originate. He upgraded the camera system to record in higher resolution and adjusted the angles to catch every approach vector, including the blind spot behind the utility box. He added laminated signage along the perimeter, clearly marking his property lines, referencing local trespassing laws, and citing the legal clause that exempted him from neighborhood association oversight. Every sign was numbered and documented with timestamps and photos, so any attempt to remove them would be immediately reportable. But even with precautions, the situation intensified. Late one night, around 2:30 a.m., the rear floodlights lit up. Tyler checked the live feed and saw two figures near his greenhouse, both in dark clothes, one holding a flashlight, the other kneeling by the side panel. Tyler didn't hesitate. He hit the external siren control, flooding the area with a pulsing alarm and high beam lights. The figures bolted, stumbling as they ran through the side hedges. Tyler called the non-emergency sheriff's line and filed an incident report. The deputy who responded was polite but vague, shrugging when asked what could be done. "You don't have a clear ID," the deputy said. "Hard to pursue without something concrete." Linda wasn't surprised when he relayed the response. "They're counting on ambiguity," she said. "No arrests, no charges, just enough of a nuisance to keep you constantly on edge. The more rattled you are, the more likely you are to make a mistake or give up." But Tyler didn't rattle. He documented everything, filed a secondary report with the city zoning committee, and began preparing a formal case of civil harassment. Linda initiated the process to obtain a protective injunction, and Tyler had the locks on his back gates reinforced with tamper-proof plates. That weekend, Karen escalated again. On Saturday morning, Tyler awoke to the sound of pounding, not at his front door, but against his fence. When he stepped onto the front porch, he saw a group of people gathered outside his property. 8 of them, all wearing matching shirts emblazoned with Bridgemont Renewal Team. They held buckets, brushes, spray equipment. Karen stood at the center, her face pink and smug, holding a rolled-up poster board. Before Tyler could speak, she raised her voice for the crowd. "We've come to offer community assistance," she declared, loud enough to be heard by the nearest 6 houses. "A few of us decided it was time to make this space safer and more appealing. Let's bring harmony back to Bridgemont." Tyler's cameras were already recording. He said nothing, simply watched. Karen motioned toward the fence, and 2 of the volunteers began unrolling plastic sheeting, as if preparing to paint over it. Tyler turned back inside and locked the door. He activated the system. A pre-recorded message began playing through outdoor speakers. "Warning, you are trespassing on private property. This action is being recorded. You are in violation of local civil codes. Leave immediately or law enforcement will be notified." The volunteers hesitated. Karen shouted something unintelligible, and then the alarm activated. A piercing, high-pitched pulse designed not to hurt, but to disorient. The crowd began to disperse, a few covering their ears, others just backing away. Karen remained planted, furious but immobile, gripping her poster like a shield. Tyler didn't confront her. He didn't call her names or step outside to shout. He waited, measured, and called Linda. The next step wouldn't be confrontation. It would be legal. Because the game had changed. They weren't hiding anymore. And Tyler wasn't going to let them take one more inch. Not of his yard, not of his time, not of his peace. The illusion of containment shattered the following week. Up until that point, Tyler had believed, perhaps naively, that escalation had a ceiling, that there were boundaries even people like Karen wouldn't cross. After the beautification ambush ended in high decibel dispersal, he expected, if not peace, then at least a return to passive resistance. Anonymous letters, neighborhood gossip, maybe a formal complaint routed through the cities, slower than molasses administrative channels. But he had misunderstood the core of Karen's mission. For her, this wasn't about property lines or uniformity or shrubbery aesthetics. It was about control. And the moment she realized she couldn't dominate him through bureaucratic pressure, she pivoted. And when people like her pivot, they do it with a smile and a knife in the same hand. It started with a formal letter from the City Enforcement Liaison Office. The document was concise, professionally formatted, and stamped with the municipal seal. It informed Tyler that his property had been flagged for potential violations of Urban Code 141C, related to non-standard modifications of privately owned structures that may impact community infrastructure. The violations were unspecified. Attached was a summons for a preliminary inspection, mandatory, non-negotiable, and scheduled for 9 a.m. the following Tuesday. Tyler read the letter twice. It had nothing to do with the council, nothing to do with neighborhood bylaws, and everything to do with some administrative string-pulling behind the scenes. Karen had gone above and around him. She wasn't trying to get him fined or shamed anymore. She was trying to use the city as a weapon. He called Linda immediately. She reviewed the document and requested a copy of the submission that triggered it. Public records revealed a complaint filed by Bridgemont Community Watch Initiative, listing multiple allegations: unpermitted water redirection, light pollution, structural encroachment, potential gray water misuse. All of it fabricated. But the city wasn't in the business of sorting truth from fiction on paper. Their job was to investigate. Linda filed a motion to delay the inspection, citing ongoing civil litigation and a request for independent third-party assessment. It bought Tyler 5 days. In that time, he did what anyone would in his position. He prepared. He cataloged every upgrade and renovation he had performed since purchasing the home, complete with invoices, permits, and contractor licenses. He photographed every inch of the greenhouse, the yard, the drainage system. He had the smart lights tested for compliance. He even hired a private environmental engineer to review the property's water flow and certify that there were no illegal modifications. Every potential weakness was documented, every question preemptively answered. Tuesday came, and with it, 2 city inspectors, both in official vehicles, both polite and visibly annoyed to be there. They walked the perimeter, checked the systems, asked the standard questions, and left without comment. Tyler offered coffee. They declined. 48 hours later, the city issued a statement of clearance. No violations found. File closed. But the damage wasn't in the outcome, it was in the implication. Now Tyler's property was on a list. Now he had a record. And more importantly, Karen had demonstrated that she could summon institutional authority to his doorstep on demand. The very next morning, his mailbox disappeared. It wasn't vandalized. It wasn't tipped over or smashed. It was gone. Post and all. Dug out, clean, no debris, no mess. Just a hole in the ground where it had been. A small white note was taped to the base of his fence. Incorrect placement. Please reinstall per guidelines. Tyler didn't replace it. He reported the theft. The responding officer, a lanky man with a relaxed drawl and scuffed boots, took the report and advised him off the record to just keep everything documented. Seems like you got folks who want to make things hard for you. No suspects were named. No further action taken. Later that afternoon, the emails began. Not from Karen directly, but from an address titled communitycooperationliveinbridgemont.org. Yet the sender listed herself as Clarisse Yellen, Public Engagement Coordinator. The messages were sunny, passive-aggressive masterpieces, each one offering Tyler an opportunity to realign with neighborhood values, including a link to a form where he could voluntarily commit to exterior conformity goals. One email included an attachment, a mock-up of his house, digitally altered to display proposed upgrades, such as uniform fencing, neutral trim color, and a flagstone path to replace his gravel walk. It was surreal. They had rendered a version of his home that had been entirely homogenized into the neighborhood aesthetic without his permission, and then suggested it as a vision of harmony. Tyler didn't respond. He archived every email and forwarded them to Linda. She began compiling a dossier of digital harassment, building a case that was quickly evolving from civil nuisance to targeted intimidation. Meanwhile, the mood on the street was shifting. Neighbors who used to wave now avoided eye contact. A woman walking her dog crossed the street rather than pass his driveway. Teenagers on bikes stopped taking the shortcut through his back alley. He wasn't ostracized, he was quarantined. Karen hadn't just declared war on his property. She had rebranded him as the problem. The final straw came that Friday. Tyler was in the backyard tending to the greenhouse, adjusting temperature settings and inspecting a row of hydroponic basil, when he heard voices. Not on the street. Closer. Too close. He muted the speaker on his phone and stepped out into the sunlight. At the side gate, 3 people were gathered. One held a tablet, another was taking photos with a DSLR camera. The third, Karen of course, stood with arms folded and an expression of performative concern. He opened the gate slightly, keeping the latch engaged. "You're on private property." Karen's eyebrows rose in mock confusion. "We're standing outside your gate, Mr. Reeves. No trespassing here." "You're photographing my property." She smiled. "Routine documentation. A few of your recent changes have raised questions. We're trying to get clarity before things escalate." He stared at her, his voice low and cold. "If you cross that line again, I'll have you removed. Legally. Permanently." Karen exhaled theatrically, as if burdened by his obstinance. "We're just trying to make sure Bridgemont remains a place people want to live, Tyler." "Then stop making it unlivable," he replied. That night, the cameras caught movement at 3:17 a.m. 2 silhouettes crept along the eastern fence. One carried something heavy. The next morning, Tyler found a half-full paint can inside his greenhouse, open with a brush dipped in it, resting against the glass. A single word was written in thick white strokes on the side panel. "Move." That was it. No slurs. No broken windows. Just a message. Stark, direct, unmissable. Tyler filed a police report. He submitted the footage. He updated Linda, who filed for a temporary restraining order. He called the city and requested increased patrol presence on the block. He double-checked his surveillance feeds, tested the backup power to his external systems, and updated all passwords. Then he did something else. He made a phone call, not to a lawyer or the police or the city. He contacted a local tactical training company, a licensed firm that specialized in first responder preparedness, active threat simulations, and security reinforcement. Their services were typically used by small police departments and municipal offices, but they also offered residential training sessions for disaster readiness, situational awareness, and perimeter control. Tyler booked 3 sessions. Then he offered them his detached garage and basement for off-hours training, legally, contractually, and with city notification. He wasn't planning for violence. He was preparing for the moment Karen tried to cross the last line. Because she would. And when she did, she wouldn't just find cameras or alarms waiting for her. She would find something she didn't expect. The arrival of the training personnel changed the rhythm of Tyler's household in subtle but unmistakable ways. They weren't police officers, and they didn't behave like government contractors. They were quiet, organized, and intensely professional. Men and women who didn't ask questions beyond the scope of logistics, and always confirmed before stepping foot on any section of the property. Tyler had disclosed the nature of his dispute to them only insofar as it was relevant to coordination. There was a neighborhood council exerting pressure. He was not part of it, and the possibility of civil interference was high. The company's lead trainer, a former emergency response coordinator named Dalton, understood the dynamics instantly. "Seen it before," he said during their initial walkthrough. "Nice neighborhoods, bad politics. We'll stay out of sight and on schedule." They used the garage for equipment drills, converting it into a compact maze with collapsible walls and emergency response markers. The basement, already well ventilated and finished with reinforced insulation, became the scene for indoor simulation work. Low-light navigation, casualty extraction, and emergency lockout scenarios. Everything was above board. Tyler filed temporary occupancy paperwork with the city, disclosed the arrangement to Linda, and posted external signage per ordinance guidelines. For all intents and purposes, it was a private preparedness initiative operating on private land. Fully legal, fully documented. He didn't tell Karen, not because it was a secret, but because it wasn't her business. But Bridgemont had eyes, and within 48 hours, those eyes had reported seeing armed men in tactical gear entering and exiting the premises. The next letter that arrived wasn't from the council. It came from the Neighborhood Security Oversight Board, a body Tyler had never heard of, demanding written confirmation that he was not hosting paramilitary gatherings on residential land. Tyler handed the letter to Linda, who nearly laughed reading it. "This is panic dressed in policy," she said. "They're fishing." Tyler let her handle the reply, which included contracts, permits, and a formal note that no HOA jurisdiction applied. But the tension had shifted. Until now, Karen and her network had operated with smug predictability, escalating slowly, dressing control as community stewardship. Now they were uncertain. The presence of uniformed professionals on Tyler's land had broken the illusion of impunity. They didn't know what he was capable of anymore, and that uncertainty bred fear. Karen didn't retreat, though. She adapted. A week after the training team's arrival, she initiated a new campaign under the banner of Bridgemont Harmony Patrol. It wasn't enforcement, she claimed. It was observation. Volunteers wearing matching navy polos and laminated badges began circulating through the neighborhood twice a day. They carried clipboards, walkie-talkies, and took notes on everything. Driveway oil stains, shrub overgrowth, fence wear. It was less about community engagement and more about establishing a visible presence. They wanted Tyler to know that they were watching. One morning, while reviewing exterior camera footage, Tyler noticed a shift in their pattern. The patrol no longer simply walked past his house. They paused. One of them would stop directly across the street and speak quietly into their shoulder mic, sometimes gesturing toward his garage. It was surveillance, thinly disguised as civic duty, and Tyler responded not with confrontation but preparation. He updated the database he had been compiling with Linda. License plates, timestamps, names from ID badges. He notified the city of increased patrol activity on his street and requested a public records check to confirm whether the Harmony Patrol had registered as a recognized community group. They had not. That weekend, one of the training sessions was scheduled to run later than usual due to weather delays. Just after dusk, with only minimal lighting in use, the front-facing cameras caught a Harmony Patrol volunteer crouching behind a hedge across the street. He wasn't taking notes. He was taking photos. long lens, high-resolution images aimed directly at Tyler's garage windows. Tyler marked the timestamp, printed the footage, and handed it to Linda. 3 days later, the city received an anonymous complaint alleging that Tyler was harboring unauthorized security personnel engaged in tactical drills with unknown intent. The complaint used deliberately ambiguous language, enough to raise suspicion but too vague to act upon. The city forwarded it to Tyler along with a brief note. No further action unless evidence is provided. Linda attached the footage of the man behind the hedge in her response and stated plainly that Tyler was the target of ongoing surveillance by unlicensed civilian actors. She included a demand for a protective perimeter zone around his property and formally accused the council of orchestrated harassment. It was a bold move, one that could trigger legal retaliation if mishandled, but it forced the city to finally acknowledge the depth of the dispute. Karen's next maneuver was her most audacious yet. On a Thursday morning, while Tyler was in a video meeting with a logistics firm in Colorado, a utility truck pulled up outside his gate. The driver wore a reflective vest, city logo on one shoulder, clipboard in hand. He walked to the gate and rang the intercom. Tyler, watching from the camera feed, answered. "Morning," the man said. "Got a work order for line access. Something flagged during a system sweep. Just need to get inside the perimeter for a minute." Tyler didn't unlock the gate. "Work order number?" The man hesitated. I can get that from the truck." "Do it," Tyler said, and the man walked away. 2 minutes later, the truck drove off. Tyler contacted the utilities office. They had no scheduled visits on record. The truck had not been logged on any official dispatch. A fake. Someone, most likely Karen's network, had sent a false technician to probe his security. He relayed the event to the training team. Dalton, calm but firm, recommended activating nighttime perimeter lockdowns 2 hours earlier than scheduled. "They're testing response time," he said. "That's recon. Next time, it won't be one guy with a clipboard." That night, Tyler lay awake longer than usual. Not because he was scared, but because the game had shifted. Karen no longer relied on passive-aggressive policy or the soft power of neighborhood influence. She had moved into the realm of subterfuge, impersonation, and infiltration. The lines weren't just blurred anymore, they were being erased, redrawn in the dirt with shaky hands and righteous intentions. Tyler wasn't at war with a woman who hated his shrubs. He was up against an ideology, one that believed peace came from uniformity and that dissent, even quiet, lawful, rational dissent, was a threat to order. And yet, she had no idea how much further he was willing to go. Because when Karen finally pushed too far, Tyler wouldn't push back. He would remove the game board entirely. The quiet didn't last. Tyler had anticipated a lull, a necessary pause after the false technician incident, perhaps a retreat into passive observation while Karen recalibrated her approach. But instead of silence, what followed was a systematic and coordinated escalation that didn't rely on subtlety anymore. The gloves had come off, and Tyler's property was now a proving ground. Not just for Karen's neighborhood empire, but for the idea that fear and group pressure could force compliance from even the most legally untouchable homeowner. She wasn't alone anymore. She had built something larger. Bridgemont wasn't just a suburb with opinions. It was becoming a cult of control. It began with noise. Every morning at 6 a.m. sharp, a leaf blower would scream to life on the edge of Tyler's property. Always the same man, always the same patch of sidewalk that didn't have a single leaf. The routine was exact, military in precision, and strategically timed to wake him even if his bedroom windows were closed. The man never made eye contact, never responded when addressed. Just noise, always at the same volume, always ending at 6:17 a.m. He was gone by the time the sun crested the rooftops. Then came the flyers. Hundreds of them printed on glossy stock, placed under wipers, stuffed into mailboxes, pinned to the community board at the grocery store. A public safety bulletin with Tyler's address bolded at the top, alongside a heavily edited photograph of the training personnel entering his garage, one of them mid-step, mid-turn, made to look like he was hiding his face. The flyer didn't make specific accusations. It asked questions. Who are these men? Why is Bridgemont hosting combat drills? What are the risks to our children? There were no names attached to the bulletin, but everyone knew where it came from. And now, fear was in play. Linda was furious. She sent formal notices to multiple addresses listed under Karen's network, threatening defamation suits and demanding a retraction of all distributed material. No response came. The flyer stopped, but the damage was already done. Tyler received a call from the District Zoning Compliance Board asking for clarity on the nature of his guess. He forwarded all contracts, legal documents, and municipal approval letters. The board issued a formal no action required determination, but the cloud had settled. Rumors don't disappear with paperwork. Then a dog died, not Tyler's. A golden retriever belonging to a family 3 houses down, found convulsing on the side lawn in the early morning. The vet later confirmed pesticide poisoning. No direct evidence linked it to anything beyond unfortunate accident. But in the days that followed, whispers started. The dog had sniffed near Tyler's fence. Someone had seen his greenhouse windows fogged over. One woman asked loudly at the cafe whether those chemical tanks he used had safety seals. The questions were vague, the accusations unspoken, but the implication hung heavy in the air. Tyler had brought danger. He didn't react publicly. He didn't post rebuttals or try to explain. Instead, he strengthened. The perimeter lockdown protocol was shortened. The exterior lighting schedule was randomized to prevent pattern tracking. The basement was reinforced with additional emergency lighting and secure key-coded access. He installed third-party monitored alarms and gave Linda full access to the incident logs. He updated the city about harassment status and submitted a formal declaration of sustained targeting under Civil Code Section 284A, Community Hostility Escalation. It was rarely used, mostly in stalking cases or violent neighbor disputes, but it gave the city a legal reason to begin archiving evidence. And still, it got worse. On a Tuesday afternoon, while Tyler was inside reviewing training simulations with Dalton's team, a van pulled up across the street. It was unmarked but clean, silver with tinted windows. 4 men exited, all dressed in identical black polos with the words Resident Protection Task Force stitched across the chest. It looked official, deliberate, carefully vague. They didn't knock. They walked directly to the sidewalk in front of Tyler's house and unfurled a pop-up tent, small but professionally made, bearing a banner, Community Watch Perimeter Awareness Zone. Within minutes, a fold-out table appeared with pamphlets about defensive landscaping and emergency visibility protocols. They never acknowledged Tyler. They didn't have to. The performance was for the neighborhood. Dalton advised shutting all blinds on the front-facing windows and limiting outdoor presence during the installation. Tyler agreed. That night, the tent remained, lit by 2 standing lamps powered by a silent generator. It stayed for 72 hours. No one visited, no one signed in, but every passerby saw it and saw that it wasn't challenged. The breaking point came that Friday. At 4:12 a.m., Tyler's external motion alarm triggered, not the typical path from the sidewalk, but the southern fence line, his most obscured boundary. He accessed the camera feed immediately. 2 individuals dressed in dark clothing were crouched near the gate latch. One held a crowbar. The other appeared to be talking into a radio. Tyler didn't hesitate. He triggered the full lockdown, external sirens, floodlights, security shutters. But something else happened. Before the would-be intruders could retreat, 2 members of the training team, already on site for an overnight drill, intercepted them. They didn't engage physically, but they illuminated them with high-powered handheld beams and commanded them to stay in place. One man dropped the crowbar and bolted. The other froze, then raised his hands. The trainers contacted Tyler, who in turn contacted the sheriff's department. By the time deputies arrived, the remaining man was sitting cross-legged in the gravel, shaking. He was 17. He claimed he had been told to help with a noise complaint and thought it was authorized community access. Tyler watched from inside, unseen. The teenager's mother arrived in hysterics 20 minutes later. She screamed at the deputies, at the trainers, at Tyler's house. She demanded to know why her son had been lured into a militarized trap. The deputies kept calm, explaining the evidence, the footage, the trespassing. No charges were filed. The boy was released to parental custody. But within 12 hours, Tyler's house appeared on the local news. Not as a victim of trespassing, but as the center of growing unrest between security-minded residents and concerned neighbors. Aerial footage showed the property's lighting, the locked gates, the garage layout, blurred but exposed. It didn't matter that the footage was obtained legally. It didn't matter that no laws were broken. The narrative had changed. Karen had managed, through force of persistence and the strategic use of fear, to twist the story. Tyler wasn't the calm, logical man defending his property. He was now the man behind the locked gates, the fortress, the sirens. She had made him the other. Linda filed emergency paperwork requesting a cease and desist order against the council. The legal language now included reckless endangerment of minor participants, unsanctioned civilian mobilization, and reputational sabotage through coordinated rumor escalation. Tyler had no illusions that it would bring relief overnight, but it set a new legal tone. This was no longer neighborly tension. It was entering the realm of negligence, if not malice. Tyler met with Dalton that evening. The lead trainer didn't mince words. "They're not going to stop because a judge scolds them," he said. "People like this only stop when they get hurt. Not physically, reputationally, legally, publicly. You want this to end? We need to flip the script." Tyler nodded. "It's time." The plan wasn't revenge, it wasn't theatrics, it was proof. The next phase wouldn't be about walls or sensors. It would be about exposure. And when it was over, Karen would have to answer for everything she started, because she'd finally made the mistake of sending someone in. And now, Tyler was going to send something back. By the time Saturday arrived, everything was already in place. Tyler hadn't slept much the night before, not from anxiety, but from preparation. Every camera on his property had been recalibrated. The additional mobile surveillance units Linda had helped him obtain, disguised as utility boxes and lawn fixtures, had been activated. All communications between him and the tactical training team were now recorded and backed up to a third-party server. It wasn't overkill anymore. It was insurance. The cease and desist order against the neighborhood council had been formally acknowledged, though predictably not respected. Karen had responded with a vague public memo claiming that community safety coordination efforts will continue uninterrupted, which everyone understood to mean she planned to ignore the court. Tyler, however, was done sending letters. Now it was time for them to walk into their own trap. It began mid-morning when a new group of individuals began circling the block. This time they weren't dressed in the Bridgemont Harmony polos or safety yellow vests. These were civilian-clothed men and women with phone cameras tucked discreetly under jackets or pressed against their hips. They didn't approach the property directly. Instead, they stood across the street, crouched behind parked cars, and whispered into Bluetooth earpieces. They weren't media. They weren't contractors. These were part of what Karen now referred to without irony as the verification team. Tyler recognized several from earlier patrol footage, the ones who had hesitated too long at his mailbox or had accidentally wandered onto his lawn pretending to look for a lost cat. They weren't neighbors. They were drones. They were the front line of her last offensive. He let them gather. Let them aim their cameras. Let them stare at the locked gate and the motionless windows. At exactly 2:08 p.m., a black SUV pulled into the driveway across the street. Karen emerged first. Sturdy, determined, her signature beige blouse tucked into high-waisted slacks, clipboard under her arm like a sword. Two men followed her, one carrying a duffel bag, the other holding a handheld scanner and what looked like a portable speaker. Tyler watched from his den. He didn't move. He didn't blink. The system recorded every step. Karen made a show of approaching the front gate slowly, confidently, calling out toward the camera she assumed was somewhere in the eaves. "Tyler Reeves," she said loudly. "This is a formal compliance verification inspection under Section 12B of the Bridgemont Residential Observation Act." It was a law that didn't exist, but it sounded real enough to be dangerous. The man with the scanner waved it near the fence latch, as if detecting hidden weaponry. The other man pulled a printed sheet from the duffel and tacked it to Tyler's mailbox post. "Official notice of review pending community sanctions." It was theater. Bad theater. But Tyler let it play out. Inside, the tactical team remained unseen. Dalton had reduced visible presence that day to avoid escalating the confrontation. The cameras were enough. The documentation would handle the rest. When Karen attempted to unhook the gate latch for closer inspection, the automated warning system triggered. A female voice, calm, authoritative, rang out over the external speakers. Unauthorized attempt to breach private property recorded. You are trespassing. This action is in violation of Protective Court Order CR 882. Law enforcement has been notified. Karen stepped back but didn't flinch. She knew the speaker didn't dial 911, but she didn't know that Tyler already had, 10 minutes earlier, a preemptive call. He had informed dispatch of ongoing harassment, of possible attempted entry, and of a known pattern of coordinated intimidation. This time, there would be no plausible deniability. 4 sheriff vehicles arrived within 9 minutes. The moment was surreal. Officers stepping out slowly, cautiously, hands near hips, not drawn, but ready. Karen's group froze. The 2 men backed away from the gate. Karen turned toward the officers with exaggerated relief, smiling like she'd summoned them herself. "Thank you for coming," she said, already stepping into a practice speech. "We're conducting a routine compliance." One of the deputies raised a hand, cutting her off. "Ma'am, you're in violation of a court order. Step back from the property immediately." Her face fell, not with fear, but with insult. She turned to protest, to argue jurisdiction, legality, whatever word she could scrape together. But the officers weren't interested. They had already reviewed the call notes. One of them pulled the printed sheet from Tyler's mailbox post and read it out loud. "Community sanctions? Who authorized this?" Karen sputtered, gesturing to her team. "We're protecting the neighborhood. We had complaints. He's built a tactical bunker in there. There are weapons, trained men. People are scared." Another officer asked flatly, "You got a warrant?" She paused. "No, but..." "Then you've got nothing." The citation was swift. Criminal trespassing. Violation of protective injunction. One of the men with her had a prior conviction for impersonating a city inspector. He was cuffed on the spot. Karen wasn't arrested, but she was detained, photographed, and served with a final legal restriction. She was no longer allowed within 100 yards of Tyler's property for any reason. No exceptions. Any further attempt to organize events, send patrols, or initiate third-party inspections would be treated as coordinated harassment. The officers dismantled the tent across the street. They took the banner. They logged every phone, every clipboard, every piece of unauthorized documentation. The footage from Tyler's cameras was handed over in full, uncut, unedited, time-stamped, and certified for digital integrity. The sheriff's department began a formal investigation into the Bridgemont Council's activities, starting with Karen's committee. Linda, already briefed, filed a follow-up suit for intentional defamation, reputational damage, and civil endangerment through targeted false reporting. The training company provided incident reports, and Dalton himself offered to testify to the restraint and professionalism exercised throughout. The following day, Karen was removed from her leadership position by emergency vote. The remaining members of the committee resigned quietly within the week. Tyler received no apologies. No one knocked on his door. No one emailed to make amends. But the silence that followed? That was enough. He walked his property the next evening for the first time in months, without carrying a tablet or checking a camera feed every 30 seconds. He stood by the gate where the incident had occurred, breathing the late spring air, feeling something not quite like triumph, but closer to clarity. Karen had made one final mistake. She had believed fear would win, that if she pressed long enough, if she applied enough social pressure, enough insinuation, he would cave. What she never understood, what people like her never understand, is that fear has a half-life. And eventually, it stops working. Tyler didn't defeat her with threats or violence. He defeated her with proof. And now, the story she tried to write was hers to answer for. In the days that followed, Bridgemont Springs became quiet. Not in the way Tyler had once valued, but in the cautious, unsettled quiet of a community suddenly confronted with the limits of its own narrative. Karen's absence was noticeable in ways more symbolic than practical. Her SUV no longer dominated the corner of Maplewood and Glade. The sidewalk chalk diagrams mapping community patrol zones faded under the sprinklers and were never redrawn, and the neighborhood board's emails dropped from 5 per week to none. The people who had once rallied under her slogans now spoke in hushed, vaguely embarrassed tones, carefully avoiding the name Reeves in conversations at the coffee shop or park benches. Not because they feared Tyler, but because they'd seen what happened when assumptions collapsed. He hadn't screamed, he hadn't threatened, he hadn't thrown punches or curses. He had watched, he had documented, he had waited, and in the end, that calm precision had done more damage to their fantasy of order than any act of defiance ever could. The council dissolved within the month. Officially, it was due to internal restructuring following a misalignment of values made known. But the truth was simpler. Without Karen, there was no spine. She had carried it with sheer willpower and performative authority, and when she was removed, the entire scaffolding of that suburban power structure crumbled under its own irrelevance. Several of her closest lieutenants left the neighborhood quietly, listing their homes at modest losses, unwilling to be associated with what the local media had come to call the Harmony Collapse. A new provisional committee was formed, smaller, more transparent, and explicitly barred from initiating patrols or compliance checks without municipal oversight. Tyler had no interest in joining it, but when the provisional board president stopped by his property to introduce herself and clarify the limits of their new charter, he offered a handshake and a nod of acknowledgement. Nothing more. He didn't need influence. He already had protection, precedent, and proof. The message had been delivered. No one would ever come through that gate again unless invited. Tyler didn't dismantle the security systems. He upgraded them, but not out of paranoia. It was practicality now, as normal as keeping a first aid kit or fire extinguisher. The tactical team rotated through twice more that year, completing their contracted sessions and using his property as a controlled site for urban scenario planning. Dalton and his crew never overstayed, never left a trace, and by the final session, they no longer drew glances from neighbors. Their presence had become normalized, just another feature of a home that no one dared misunderstand anymore. Linda closed the legal proceedings with finality. The civil case against Karen ended in a settlement, sealed but sufficient. The terms barred her from any future leadership or organizing roles in any registered neighborhood group within the state. Tyler donated a portion of the settlement funds to a legal fund for property owners facing similar harassment elsewhere, with Linda's firm administering pro bono outreach. It wasn't revenge. It was continuity. He hadn't fought a battle. He'd reinforced a boundary, and now others could benefit from the same clarity. For Tyler, life resumed, unchanged in its rhythm but irrevocably altered in tone. He no longer heard phantom footsteps outside his fence or paused when headlights passed slowly on the street. His mornings returned to quiet routines, broken only by the low hum of greenhouse vents, cycling warm air, and the occasional chime of a notification from his system. Now rarely anything but birds or wind. He began to enjoy his space again, not just protect it. One afternoon, while tending to the basil crop, he noticed something unusual in the mailbox. Recently reinstalled, anchored in reinforced concrete and protected by a discreet camera dome. It was a postcard, no return address. Just one sentence, handwritten in neat cursive. "You made it harder for the next Karen." There was no signature, but Tyler didn't need one. He tucked the card into a drawer without comment. The irony wasn't lost on him. In fighting to keep the world out, he had inadvertently created something stronger than solitude. He had established reputation, consequence, and an unspoken perimeter not just around his property, but around the very idea of interference. His home had become a symbol, quietly without banners or headlines, for the principle that not everything must be shared. Not every fence needs a gate, and not every neighbor deserves entry. In a world that increasingly blurred the line between collective identity and personal domain, Tyler Reeves had drawn a line so clear it could be seen from across the street. And once drawn, it never had to be redrawn again.